Did you know that in the 1900s, the Portuguese cultivar of Verdelho was the very most planted white cultivar in all of Australia? It was brought to the country by two men, James Busby and John MacArthur. Now, James Busby was a British citizen who made his way to Australia and ended up planting the country's very first Vitis vinifera vines. And so today he's widely regarded as the father of Australian wine. Now, John MacArthur, for his part, was a wool merchant at one point, but also the founder of the country's very first commercial estate, Camden Park Estate. Now, both of these men operated in New South Wales, and there most of the Verdelho at the time was used in the making of fortified wines. But it was out on the west coast that winemakers and viticulturists discovered that Verdelho is not only extremely suited to the climate out there, but also makes some really delicious and age-worthy table wines as well. It was these wines that Simon Six's Frans Milan tasted when he went on a trip to Australia in the late 80s, early 90s. And he was so impressed with these wines that by 1996, he had managed to import Verdelho, put it through quarantine, and plant South Africa's very first Verdelho vineyard. This might explain why, even though Verdelho is undoubtedly a Portuguese cultivar, the only Verdelho clone available in South Africa is VH1, which is an Australian clone, not Portuguese at all. It should be noted that VH1, try as it might, was never as cool as the far more widely respected Madeira Tinta Verdelho, or MTV. And while we're on the topic of South Africa's very first Verdelho vineyard, that 1996 vineyard is alive and well, and in fact produces fruit that goes into a very cool range of wines that Simon Six released that celebrates South Africa's viticultural history and connection to the wine grapes of the Mediterranean. So hunt those down when you get the chance. Now, the reason that we're talking about Verdelho at all today is because today's hand drink solo wine of the day is the Krans Tritonia Verdelho, which is vinified by winemaker Christoph de Wet. The fruit for this wine comes from the Conqueror region in the South African winelands, more specifically from the district of Calitzdorp on the estate of de Krans, which is owned by Boots Nel and the Nel family. As we've mentioned in videos elsewhere, Calitzdorp really is like its own little mini Portugal, not only because it produces many award-winning world-class port-style wines, but also because it has a glut of vineyards that are planted with Portuguese cultivars that also make delicious still wines. The legend has it back in the day that Chris Nel, Boots Nel's father, one day decided that he wanted to make Shiraz wine in Calitzdorp. And so he went to his local nursery and he got some Shiraz vines and he planted them and started farming. And after many vintages of successful Shiraz harvesting and winemaking, he was casually told by a passing viticulturalist that his beloved block of Shiraz was by no means Shiraz in any way or form, and was in fact, beyond a shadow of doubt, Tinta Barocca. Oops. Mercifully, on his journey of trying to figure out what on earth to do with a block of vineyards that he could no longer sell as Shiraz, Chris took a trip to the Douro and discovered, as we've already said, that the Douro is very much like Calitzdorp. And so instead of coming back and ripping up all his vines and seeking to banish from sight his clerical or administrative error, he instead doubled down and planted loads more Portuguese cultivars, which enabled de Krans to become South Africa's very first estate to bottle a Cape vintage port, using grapes like Tinta Barocca, Tinta Amarela, Touriga Franca, or Touriga Nacional. And while we're discussing firsts in the South African wine industry, the de Krans Tritonia Verdelho was also South Africa's very first cultivar bottling of the grape. So as you can see, today's Verdelho comes off the back of a very long, fascinating history of Afro-Portuguese fusion. But seeing how well suited this cultivar is to the South African wine climate, I'd wager a bet that its future is going to be even more interesting than its past. Now when we get into the glass and give this guy a sniff, well, we get a really delightful, generous nose of some zested lime, but there's also honeysuckle florals. Then there's some sweeter queen pineapple notes. And then because it is barrel matured, along with that comes some vanilla spice and then a little bit of savory white pepper spice right at the back of the Vanguard. Let's get into the glass and see what it tastes like. Well, the warmer elements to the Calitzdorp climate definitely do allow for a little bit of sunshine in the glass, because up front you met with sweeter elements of peach fruit and also that queen pineapple that I mentioned on the nose. But keeping that in check, there's some really fascinating textured, pithy sort of lime and mare lemon notes that really take that sweeter element and balance it up beautifully. We also know that Verdelho has an insane amount of natural acidity. It's quite early ripening. This particular wine has over 6 grams of acid after all is said and done, which is quite a lot. And then as the wine draws to a close, you have the sweeter oak spice against the savory pepper spice on the palate too, and a fascinating, almost salted apricot note. So this wine really does keep you intrigued all the way to the finish. Well, that's all we have time for today, but if you enjoyed the video, then support us on Patreon so that we can make more of these sorts of videos, and subscribe to the Hand Drink Solo YouTube channel, where we publish at least 6 videos each month talking about things like wine science, wine history, unusual cultivars, and some of the influential and pioneering winemakers that are coming out of the unique South African wine bits.